Have you ever stopped to think about what it's like to live in a country where your freedom is constantly threatened by a powerful, looming neighbor? In Georgia, this is the daily reality for millions who resist the pressure of an immense force that insists on dictating the fate of their nation. Imagine that while you try to build a free life, there are forces manipulating the scene behind the curtains, using money, power, and influence to change the course of an entire society. And all of this, of course, without firing a single shot. A type of silent war that can be as devastating as an invasion. Georgia becomes a kind of testing ground for power strategies that go far beyond brute force. It's a game of influence, of manipulating ideas, where even the country's own leaders may, without the people noticing, align themselves with foreign interests. And who are these players? A group of oligarchs, an elite with privileged connections and a dangerous closeness to the Russian government. For the people, the future is uncertain and, at the same time, an opportunity to demonstrate their resilience and unwavering desire for freedom and self-determination. If all this sounds like a movie drama, know that it's a real story, a lesson that resonates throughout the region and serves as a warning to any nation that values its independence. Are you ready to dive into this world? Ready to understand how even a small country can resist and seek its own identity amid powerful forces trying to control it? Then get ready, because what you'll learn here is a practical lesson in courage and resilience. Georgia, a small nation on the edge of the Russian giant, faces a situation that many might consider surreal. 20% of its territory is occupied by Russia. This is a threat that goes beyond the visible, affecting the very essence of its national identity. Imagine having a significant part of your own country, your land, your roots under the control of another. This situation keeps the Georgian people in a constant state of vigilance and resistance, determined to preserve not only what lies within their borders, but the very spirit of Georgia itself. This kind of struggle, as old as the territory itself, goes deep, fostering unity and perseverance among the Georgians. The presence of Russian soldiers is not just a security issue. It's a constant provocation that impacts even the smallest things. Imagine walking through your city, seeing signs of local culture, and then, suddenly, coming across a military post that represents something completely opposite to your values. It's almost surreal. They fight to keep what makes them Georgian, to keep what makes that land unique, trying to protect their culture, their language, and their traditions. The silent invasion, not always with arms but through an occupation that installs itself subtly, is a challenge that few countries face today, and Georgia knows just how profound this battle is. And why does this matter so much? Because, for a people with such ancient roots, this physical space is more than geography. It's living history. The land itself becomes an extension of the country's soul. Preserving their culture, language, and way of life isn't merely a choice. For many Georgians, it's a matter of existence. Conversations on every street corner brim with a mix of pride and caution. Every detail of daily life transforms into a declaration of independence and courage against the powerful northern neighbor, who insists on redrawing borders and challenging the autonomy of neighboring countries. It's an endless struggle, but Georgians persist, knowing that with each day they stand firm in their land. They preserve an important piece of history. In Georgia, the border is not a mere geographical limit. It is turned into a line of tension and unease that directly impacts people's lives. Imagine that your church, where you learned from a young age about values and traditions, is now beyond a checkpoint, guarded by soldiers who don't share your language, culture, or faith. It's not just a political issue. It's something that invades your routine, as if an invisible wall had been placed between family members and friends, between work and home, between faith and devotion. This reality creates a sense of urgency and adaptation, a feeling that, at any moment, everything could change and everything depends on the presence of Russian soldiers there. These unrecognized military posts and barriers divide communities, destroy old ties, and create a division that seems almost absurd. Imagine waking up and discovering that, from one day to the next, that road leading to your farm is now part of an unofficial territory, controlled by foreign forces. This is how Georgians live, in a constant attempt to bypass invisible limits, while struggling to maintain their connection to the land and vital resources that have always been part of their lives. For Georgians, This physical separation is a direct affront to freedom of movement, the right to live without being blocked or supervised. Life there on the border is a mix of resistance and adaptation, a routine marked by the unexpected. And yet, they persist, reorganizing their daily lives with creativity and resilience. The communities near the border share tips, chart new paths to overcome the imposed limitations, hold meetings to exchange experiences, and discuss solutions to problems that, elsewhere, would be unimaginable. Every interaction is like a strategy, a silent but firm act of resistance. It's a struggle that demands strength but also cunning and unity, qualities that Georgians have in abundance. This daily resistance is a constant reminder that the lines drawn by Russian power do not define the culture, nor the spirit of those who remain there. Georgia's relationship with Russia is an ancient dance, a story of dominance and resistance that spans centuries. Since the days when the Russian Empire expanded over the Caucasus region, Georgians have fought to preserve their roots, language, and traditions. The desire for autonomy is not recent. It's embedded in every mountain, every village. In the 1990s, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, Georgia saw a chance to finally break free and establish a truly independent nation. It was a moment to build alliances with the West, to seek a safe place alongside powers that shared the same values of sovereignty and freedom. With this goal in mind, Georgia embarked on a journey toward NATO and European Union membership, strengthening its ties with the West. A move that was about more than just diplomacy. It was a statement of identity. By looking to the West, the country sought support that, to them, meant security, culture, and freedom. After all, Russia not only physically surrounded the country but also tried to mold it in its image, something that Georgians deeply rejected. People wanted more than nominal independence. They wanted the security of knowing they wouldn't be at the mercy of their northern neighbor if they chose their own path. This pursuit of integration with the Western world, however, brought with it a series of internal challenges and questions. How to build an identity that is both traditional and open to the new. How to ensure that Georgian culture, so unique and vibrant, remained intact while seeking modernization aligned with Europe. The answers to these questions were not simple, but by choosing this path, Georgia opted for a future in which sovereignty would prevail over control and culture over domination. This choice, however, would not go unnoticed, and Russia's response to Georgia's rapprochement with the West was not long in coming. In 2008, Georgia's path toward Western security encountered a brutal obstacle: the Russian invasion. The year began with promises and hopes, especially after NATO declared that one day, Georgia could join the bloc. It was a sign that perhaps the long-sought protection was closer than ever. But this rapprochement raised alarms in Moscow, and the Kremlin quickly responded with an invasion that caught the world by surprise. Russian troops entered the country and, in a coordinated move, declared independence for the regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, claiming them as autonomous entities. For many, this action was seen as a clear and calculated message. The message was direct. Any Georgian rapprochement with the West would bring severe consequences. This strategy of divide and conquer, which Moscow applied to Georgia, would later be replicated in another neighboring country, Ukraine. In both cases, Russia's modus operandi was the same: destabilize, occupy, and fragment. This pattern of manipulating neighboring territories has been a hallmark of Russian power, something they skillfully employ to ensure their spheres of influence do not escape their control. For the Georgian people, the impact of the invasion was profound and emotional. The memories of the conflict remain fresh in people's minds. Imagine losing part of your territory to a foreign power, feeling that promises of protection were not enough. The 2008 invasion not only wounded national pride but also generated a sense of vulnerability. Georgians know that their aspirations for security and autonomy disturb the northern neighbor, and the shadow of this threat has hung over them ever since. This feeling of uncertainty and the echo of 2008 remain present, shaping the Georgian perspective on their own survival. In recent years, Georgia has seen a wave of protests reflecting public discontent with measures that many believe threaten the country's freedom and future. The spark that ignited the demonstrations came with the approval of a law directly inspired by the Russian model. Organizations funded by foreign sources were required to register as foreign agents, For Georgians, who value independence and see Russia as a constant threat, this law represented an attempt to silence critical voices and impose subtle control over society. On the streets of Tbilisi, the protest became a statement of resistance against any attempt at authoritarianism. These protests show how Georgian youth, in particular, are willing to fight for the freedom and Western identity they so desire. They took to the streets not only to defend freedom of expression but also to reaffirm their choice for a Western future, away from Russian influence. Posters, chants, and European flags dominated the streets, and the message was clear. They would not accept their country being shaped in the image of a Russia that still exerts influence over Georgia's political and economic spheres. It was a battle of ideals, and the Georgian people proved they were ready to resist oppression. Furthermore, resistance was not limited to the streets. Social media exploded with messages of support for the protests and condemnation of what was seen as a threat to freedom. Young people and adults, Georgians living in the country and abroad, united to denounce the risk of an undesired rapprochement with Russian authoritarianism. This movement not only strengthened the sense of unity but also served as an example for other nations that share this fear regarding Russian influence. And so, Georgia's struggle becomes a symbol of resilience amid internal and external pressures. Russian influence in Georgia does not manifest only through soldiers and tanks. It's insidious, arriving through cultural and political avenues. Instead of a direct invasion, the Kremlin invests in something less visible but equally powerful: soft power. This subtle power tries, little by little, to shape Georgians' perceptions, decisions, and even beliefs. A clear example of this is the support of part of the Georgian elite, made up of figures who maintain close ties with Russia and, in many cases, discreetly promote the Russian agenda. This indirect alliance between local leaders and Moscow creates a conflict of values and a divide within society. For many Georgians, this cultural and political manipulation is seen as a low blow, as it targets the nation's principles and identity. In events, television programs, and even local entertainment, elements of Russian culture appear as something normal and even desirable. However, for those more attentive, these elements are seen as part of a calculated strategy to bring Georgia closer to the Russian sphere of influence. It's a process that infiltrates details, almost like a silent infiltration that starts small and, if unchecked, can grow to transform the country's foundations. This issue sparks intense debates within Georgia. Should the country embrace a European future or, in some way, yield to the cultural pressures that Russia imposes? Georgian youth, in particular, view this attempt at Russian influence with distrust and resistance. They know that while ties with Russian culture are strengthened, bonds with Europe and the West may weaken. And that's precisely why resistance against this soft power is so essential for Georgia. It's an invisible but decisive battle to ensure the country does not lose its way, nor its freedom of choice. In Georgia, the desire for a European identity and a Western future is palpable, especially among the youth, who see in Western values a connection to freedom and progress. Despite the physical proximity and constant Russian attempts at influence, most Georgians identify more with Europe than with the northern giant. This preference is not just a matter of foreign policy. It reflects a cultural yearning for a nation free from any domination or external intervention. Georgians look to the European Union and NATO as allies who can guarantee the security and stability that Russia would never offer. The streets of Georgia reflect this aspiration. Young people wearing European flag shirts, cultural events, and activities promoting Western values are common sights in Georgian cities. This fervor for the West is something Russia watches with concern because the closer the country gets to Europe, the further it moves from Russian influence. This dynamic creates constant tension, where the country finds itself caught between a Russia that insists on pulling it back and a West that represents freedom and innovation. It's a dilemma not easily solved, but one that defines the pulse of Georgia. And what's most fascinating is the resilience of Georgians in this choice. They know that embracing the West means facing Moscow's constant disapproval and pressure. Yet, it's a price many are willing to pay, as the promise of an alliance with the West represents not only protection but also recognition of the European identity they cultivate. This choice for autonomy and Western identity is a clear message, a cry of independence that echoes throughout Georgia. And still, the path remains arduous, with Georgia's future constantly tested by the forces surrounding it. Georgian politics carry a complex particularity: the influence of oligarchs with strong Russian connections. One of the most powerful of these individuals wields a discreet but noticeable influence over governmental decisions, often aligning Georgian interests with those of Moscow. This presence is seen by many Georgians as a direct threat to national autonomy. When someone with such economic power and close ties to Russia assumes such an influential role, doubts about the government's independence and political intentions only increase. For the people, this relationship is seen as a veiled form of Russian control, extending through the Georgian elite. The influence of these oligarchs goes beyond political decisions. It directly impacts the country's economic and social landscape. While Russian interests are preserved, projects and investments that could strengthen ties with the West end up compromised. This economic and political dependence becomes a control tool, hindering Georgian progress toward an independent future. Thus, the struggle for autonomy is not only fought at the borders, but also in economic choices and the figures that make up Georgia's internal power, creating a sort of silent battle for sovereignty. The Georgian people, aware of these dynamics, view this scenario as a reason for constant vigilance. They know that each decision made by these figures could mean another step toward Russian control. It's as if the fight for freedom is not only in the streets or foreign policies, but also in the alliances formed within Georgia's own government. And so, the Georgians continue to question, resist, and remain alert, knowing that each step toward autonomy must be careful. And while these powerful figures remain, the Russian shadow continues to hover over Georgian politics. So, with all this in mind, what would you do to protect what's yours? The fight for freedom and national identity, as we see in Georgia, is a daily battle that demands courage and constant vigilance. Think about your own life. Have you noticed external influences shaping your choices, whether in your routine or the decisions you make? Georgia's reality serves as a mirror for each of us, reminding us that, just like them, we can always question and pursue what's rightfully ours. And if you feel you can do more, what's stopping you? This is the moment to draw inspiration from the strength of a people who face colossal forces to keep their path and autonomy. It's time to apply this determination in your daily life, in the pursuit of a future that reflects your values and dreams. So what are you waiting for? Join us, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to keep learning about courage, resilience, and freedom. Together, we'll explore more topics that help us become the best versions of ourselves.